On the night of September 11th, 2012, terrorists attacked the U.S. State Department's Special Mission Compound and a nearby CIA station called the Annex in Benghazi, Libya. Since that night, there have been seemingly endless questions about what went wrong and who within the U.S. government bureaucracy is to blame, if anyone, for the death of 4 Americans, including Ambassador Chris Stevens. The harrowing account of that security team who fought to repel the attackers and protect the American stations at the Annex is told in the New York Times best-selling book, 13 Hours, the inside account of what really happened in Benghazi. It's also the subject of the newly released hit film, 13 Hours, directed by the famed director Michael Bay. The book's author is Mitchell Zuckoff. Mitchell Zuckoff is a New York Times best-selling author, 2 decades investigative reporter, national correspondent for the Boston Globe, Pulitzer Prize nominee, and professor of journalism at Boston University. Congratulations, Mitchell. Are you surprised at all the attention this movie is getting?
I guess I'm not surprised. First, thank you, Larry, but I guess I'm not surprised. I think I knew that you step into the Benghazi business and you know people are going to notice.
All right, what prompted you to even get started to write this?
Well, the guys who fought the battle had stuck together in the months afterward, and they were listening to all the political byplay that was going on, and they decided they needed to tell their story, and they wanted to tell it as much as possible outside of the political realm. And they reached out to me through some publishing contacts, and frankly, I hesitated for a moment, and I wondered, is this something I needed to get involved in? But as soon as I met them, I knew that this was a book I had to write. These are remarkable men, true heroes, and I felt honored to tell their story.
Was it tough to write?
It was. It was a challenge to write it because, first thing I had to do was keep away all of the static and all the noise and focus on the signal. And the signal was what happened that night in the ticking clock of those 13 hours when they were outmanned, outgunned, and under tremendous stress and fire. And to keep it so that we hoped that readers and ultimately moviegoers would feel what they felt that night.
Well,
so it was
obviously,
a challenge.
The book got great reviews. The movie's getting great reviews.
Thank you.
Has the Congressional Committee read it?
I believe they have read the book, indeed, yes. I've had some contacts with the Select Committee and some of the earlier committees as well, so I believe they're fully aware.
All right, briefly, Mitchell, in a nutshell, if that's possible, what happened that night?
Well, terrorists attacked the compound, the diplomatic compound where Ambassador Chris Stevens was staying, and almost immediately overran it. There were only 5 diplomatic security guards there with him and with Sean Smith, his computer guy. And the call goes out immediately about a mile away to this secret other compound, the Annex, as you mentioned, the CIA base. And they're trying to figure out what to do, and immediately this 6-member team, these guys are called GRS, Global Response Staff, former Navy SEALs, former Army Ranger, former Marines, who are just elite operators who immediately jock up, as they call it, and get ready to go. And they're held back, and they're held back by the CIA station chief who's trying to coordinate with locals to respond, but frankly, the guys thought that was a fool's errand because the locals were never going to put themselves in the harm's way like this for an American ambassador. So they go on their own and they fight their way into the compound. They get the diplomatic security guys out. Tragically, during that time period, Ambassador Stevens and Sean Smith were killed by smoke inhalation because the terrorists set fire to the building. And then essentially the brief version is through the course of the rest of the night, they gather everyone there at the Annex, about close to 25 to 30 people who are there at the CIA base, and they keep them alive. They take to the rooftops and they fight off wave after wave of attackers. And finally, tragically, mortars come in, these arching shells, and 2 more men are killed. 2 more heroes are killed.
2 of this 6?
One was one of the six, and one was another GRS member who had arrived late in the process, only minutes before, frankly, from Tripoli. But one of the six, one of the leaders of our six-man team, Tyrone Woods, who's a former Navy SEAL, who was very much a leader of this six-man team, who fought his way in and out and led these guys, he tragically died from the mortar attack, and as did Glenn Doherty.
Are there other teams like this stationed in various areas?
There are. Post 9/11, the CIA realized that the spies, the intelligence gatherers, were not necessarily what you and I would think of as James Bond or Jason Bourne. These were not licensed to kill kind of folks. These were brilliant young men and women and older men and women, but they needed this kind of protection that they could only get from somebody like a Ty Woods, who had been 20 years a Navy SEAL. And so the GRS was created. It was highly secretive until Benghazi. Now we're much more aware that they are around the world in teams.
Okay. According to the book and the film, the CIA station chief orders a security team waiting to help the Americans under siege to stand down.
Correct.
CIA spokesman Ryan Trapani says that's inaccurate. He said no one will mistake this movie for a documentary. He said it's a distortion of the events and the people who served in Benghazi that night. And he denies that that team was told to stand down.
I think the CIA response, and I know Ryan, but I think it's predictable but not credible. The guys on the ground who were actually there, who heard those words, have put their names to the book, and they are very much on the record confirming this. And also logically, it makes no sense. If you read the base chief's statement into the Washington Post the other day, it would seem he neither delayed them nor approved them leaving. So that's nonsensical. He's suggesting the guys on their own decided to delay when they're hearing gunfire a mile away, when they know that Americans are under fire, when they're hearing radio calls desperate for help, that they sat there waiting for the enemy to dig in. These are guys with a collective century of military experience. They knew that the longer they waited, the harder it would be. And they said at the time, and they said immediately to me afterward when I met them, that we were told to stand down. John Tigan and Chris Paranto put their name to that. Two other guys who didn't hear it directly knew they were being delayed. So I understand the station chief, is taking this position, but I think both logic and the facts are not on his side.
Could the ambassador have been saved?
Well, it's always difficult in hindsight to say these things, but I will say this. The guys who were there that night felt they could have saved them. They've told me that many times. They felt as though had they left earlier, and what we know that Ambassador Stevens and Chris and Sean Smith died of smoke inhalation. Smoke inhalation it's a function of time. And so the longer you delay, the more time you give to the terrorists to set fire to the diplomatic compound, to delay the guy's entrance. And as soon as they reached the compound, they ran right into that burning building. Had they had more time, I think it's possible. I know they feel very strongly that they would have.
What do you make of the whole Hillary Clinton Benghazi story and her involvement?
Well, Secretary Clinton has taken responsibility, both publicly in her book, for the failures beforehand. And I think that's where we should focus on the State Department. The simple truth, and no one disputes this on either side of the aisle, and certainly not in the Secretary's camp, that the diplomatic compound was woefully unprepared for a terrorist attack such as this. This was not a consulate, it was not an embassy, and therefore it didn't have to meet those kind of standards, those kind of hard target standards. And so it was a soft target. And we should not have had our diplomats there, we should not have had our ambassador there, certainly not on September 11th. And so I think it's appropriate to have blamed and for the Secretary to take responsibility, as she did, for those failures to prepare before this ever happened.
What do you make of Congressman Schiff, a Democrat, supporter of Hillary, who says if the film portrays those who went to rescue people at the diplomatic facility as doing so in disregard of orders, that's also plainly at odds with the facts. It may make for good entertainment. It doesn't make for a well-informed public.
Well, I can just urge Congressman Schiff to speak to the guys who I spoke with, who were there, who are very public about the fact that they did go without any kind of approval. And it's interesting, if Congressman Schiff looks at the CIA-based chief's statement and looks closely, as I did, he'll see he never says he authorized their departure. He says they left, or eventually, they moved out. Well, if he can't have it both ways. These guys know what they experienced, and they have been consistent and public about what happened that night. It's not for political reasons. They had no politics involved. When they first told me about this in mid-2013, they were not focused on the presidential election or on Congressman Schiff's campaign or his hopes for the Clinton administration. These guys are incredibly credible. They're genuine heroes, and I think their position should be respected.
Were you an advisor on the film?
I was, largely informally, but I talked throughout the process with the screenwriter, Chuck Hogan, who did a wonderful job, and also with Michael Bay. I was in Malta during the filming, and in the aftermath I can't even count how many discussions with Michael and with his team about how to keep it as truthful, with the understanding it is a movie, it is a dramatic portrayal, but I think it gets the essential truths absolutely right.
The great novelist Erskine Caldwell told me many years ago that he never judged a film on a book he wrote because a film isn't a book. Do you feel that way? That you have to do things on film? For example, you can't film a thought.
Exactly. You have to put it into a character's mouth. And so these are very different media. But at the same, and frankly, again, the book is called 13 Hours. The movie's 2 hours. So you have to make changes. And so those kinds of condensations, those kinds of dialogue creation, it's necessitated by the nature of the different media. Having said that, though, there are films that disrespect their source material, and this was not one of them.
Did you get along with the director right away?
Right, I did, and I'll tell you why. Well, my first conversation with Michael, he told me his mother told him, "Why are you what do you need this for? Why are you getting involved with Benghazi?" And by coincidence, my mother told me the same thing before I started on the book. And so that was our initial rapport. And then Michael said something that I was very pleased to hear. He said, "This is going to be my most real movie." And obviously, we know Michael Bay, having, the blockbuster, the Transformers series, some of his other films, which are, by definition, fictional. There are no robots in this movie. But to his great credit, Michael, from the get-go, he focused on the book. He worked with Chuck, the screenwriter, Chuck Hogan, to try and make it as authentic as possible. And again, this is not a documentary. This is a dramatic portrayal of these events.
It's rumored
I think Michael did great.
It's rumored that Michael Bay is very right-wing politically. Is that true? And does that affect the filming?
I've heard those rumors as well, but I've never seen it. And in I don't know, countless discussions with him, that has never come through. What has come through is a tremendous respect for the military, but I did not interpret Michael as right-wing from anything he said to me.
All right. By the way, what's in Benghazi now?
It's a bit of a mess. Libya is a failed state, and the eastern part of Libya, where Benghazi is still a place where various different factions and militias are roaming around trying to figure out what a post-Gaddafi Libya is really going to look like.
When do you expect the committee's report?
That's a great question, Larry. I think Trey Gowdy, the chairman of that committee, has said, when it's done. I think he's very wise not to go early, because I think this is going to be the last look, we think, that Congress is going to take at this. So he wants it to be complete, but I would expect in probably the middle of this year.
And the rumor is that since the committee has more Republicans than Democrats, if Hillary's the nominee, it's going to affect the presidential race. Do you think so?
At this point, I feel as though it's people's opinions about Benghazi are fairly calcified. I'm not sure that that anything, whether this film or my book or the Select Committee's report, is going to move the needle that much. But then again, I'm a reporter, not a prognosticator.
Mitchell, thank you so much. Congratulations on the success of the book and the film.
Thank you very much, Larry.